What if I told you that everything you believe about yourself, your desires, your fears, your definition of success, even the way you see your own reflection in the mirror, isn't actually yours? What if the voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, isn't your voice at all? Right now, as you're listening to this, there's a program running in the background of your mind. It's been running since the day you were born. And just like the apps on your phone that drain your battery without you noticing, this program has been draining your happiness, your confidence, your sense of self-worth for decades. The program has a name, it's called conditioning, and it's so seamless, so invisible that most people go their entire lives without ever realizing it's there. But here's what's even more disturbing. This isn't some conspiracy theory or abstract concept. This is measurable, documented, scientifically proven reality. The thoughts you think are your own, many of them were planted there before you could even speak. The standards you're desperately trying to meet, they were programmed into you by systems that profit from your dissatisfaction. And the most tragic part, you're not just running someone else's program, you're defending it. You're protecting the very beliefs that are destroying your peace of mind, convinced that they're keeping you safe, when in reality they're keeping you trapped. But what if I told you there's a way out? What if I told you that recognizing this programming is the first step to breaking free from it? And what if I told you that on the other side of this realization lies a kind of freedom so profound, so liberating, that it will fundamentally change how you experience every single day of your life? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover isn't just going to change how you see yourself, it's going to change everything. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's 34, works in marketing, drives a decent car, lives in a nice apartment. By most measures, she's successful. But every morning, Sarah wakes up with a knot in her stomach. She reaches for her phone, the same way millions of people do, and within seconds she's scrolling through Instagram. Beautiful people in beautiful places, living what appears to be beautiful lives. Her college friend just bought a house, her co-worker got promoted, her sister's vacation photos look like a magazine spread, and there it is, that familiar ache, that voice that says, "You're falling behind." Sarah doesn't realize it, but in this moment, she's not thinking her own thoughts. She's running a program that was installed in her mind decades ago. A program that says her worth is determined by comparison. A program that measures her life against others and always finds it lacking. This program didn't start with social media. It started when she was 3 years old and her mother said, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" It was reinforced when she was 7 and got a C on a test while her friend got an A. It was updated when she was 15 and didn't get invited to the popular kids' party. It was validated by every movie that told her she needed to be thinner, every magazine that showed her what success looked like, every advertisement that promised happiness through acquisition. By the time Sarah was an adult, this program was so deeply embedded in her operating system that she couldn't tell where the programming ended and her authentic self began. But here's what's fascinating and terrifying about Sarah's story. She's not unique, she's the norm. Right now, there are billions of people on this planet running variations of the same program. They're lying awake at night, worried about keeping up. They're making decisions based on what others might think. They're chasing goals that aren't even their own, trying to fill a void that was artificially created by the very society that claims to want them to succeed. And the most insidious part, they think it's their choice. They think they're freely deciding to compete, to compare, to constantly measure themselves against impossible standards. They don't realize they're living their lives according to code that was written by someone else for someone else's benefit. The advertising industry alone spends over $600 billion a year to ensure that you never feel satisfied with what you have. Think about that for a moment. $600 billion dedicated to making you feel inadequate. That's more than the GDP of most countries, all focused on programming you to believe that happiness is always one purchase away. And you know, it works. It works so well that we don't even question it anymore. We just accept that wanting more, being more, having more is natural. We accept that anxiety about our place in the world is normal. We accept that peace of mind is a luxury, not a default state. But what if I told you that anxiety isn't normal? What if I told you that the constant need to prove yourself, to achieve, to compete, what if all of that is just programming? And what if the key to breaking free isn't about getting better at the game, but realizing you don't have to play it at all? Let's talk about how deep this programming actually goes. In 1965, a psychologist named Martin Seligman conducted an experiment that would change our understanding of human behavior forever. He placed dogs in a box with an electric floor that would shock them. But here's the twist. The dogs could easily escape by jumping over a low barrier to safety, but these weren't ordinary dogs. These were dogs that had previously been conditioned to believe they were helpless. They had learned through repeated experiences that nothing they did mattered. So when the shocks began, they didn't even try to escape. They just lay there and endured the pain, even though freedom was literally one small jump away. Seligman called this learned helplessness. And when he published his findings, researchers around the world began to recognize the same pattern in humans. You see, we're not born believing we're not good enough. Babies don't look in mirrors and wish they were different. Children don't naturally compare their toys to other children's toys until someone teaches them to. We learn these behaviors, we're conditioned into them. And here's where it gets really interesting. The same neural pathways that create learned helplessness are the ones that create learned dissatisfaction. When you're constantly exposed to messages that you're not enough, your brain literally rewires itself to expect inadequacy. It becomes your default state. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, one of the world's leading neuroscientists, explains it this way. We are not prisoners of our genes or our environment. We are prisoners of our own thoughts about our genes and environment. In other words, it's not reality that controls us. It's our programmed interpretation of reality. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about why this programming exists in the first place. Throughout human history, comparison served a survival function. If you were part of a tribe, knowing your place in the hierarchy could mean the difference between life and death. If you were weaker than others, you needed to compensate with intelligence or social skills. If you were cast out, you didn't survive. This is why your brain is hardwired to notice social status, to compare, to constantly assess where you stand relative to others. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Or at least it was a feature when we lived in groups of 50 to 150 people and our survival depended on social cooperation. But here's the problem. We're no longer living in tribes of 150 people. We're living in a global village of 8 billion people, constantly exposed to the highlight reels of millions of strangers through our screens. Our ancient brain systems are trying to process information they were never designed to handle. And certain people have figured out how to exploit this vulnerability. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who lived nearly 2,000 years ago, said something profound. No one can hurt you without your permission. But he wasn't talking about physical harm. He was talking about the kind of psychological programming we're discussing. Epictetus understood that suffering isn't caused by external circumstances, it's caused by our thoughts about external circumstances. He understood that when you compare yourself to others, you're not responding to reality, you're responding to a story about reality that exists only in your mind. The Buddhists figured this out too. They have a term, dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, but really means the dissatisfaction that comes from wanting things to be different than they are. And according to Buddhist philosophy, this dissatisfaction isn't a natural state, it's a learned state, it's conditioning. But here's where modern psychology gets really fascinating. Researchers have discovered that the brain regions activated when we experience social rejection are the same regions activated when we experience physical pain. Think about that. When you feel like you don't measure up, when you feel excluded or inadequate, your brain is processing that experience as if you're being physically injured. This is why comparison doesn't just make you feel bad, it literally hurts. And because pain motivates action, you're driven to try to stop the pain by achieving more, buying more, becoming more. But here's the cruel irony. The more you try to fix the pain through external means, the stronger the programming becomes. Dr. Tim Kasser's research on materialism and well-being has shown that people who are more focused on external validation, things like money, image, and fame, actually report lower levels of well-being, more anxiety, and weaker social connections. The very things our programming tells us will make us happy are, oddly enough, the things that make us miserable. And here's the kicker. This isn't accidental. There are entire industries built on maintaining your dissatisfaction. Fashion, cosmetics, luxury goods, even certain aspects of education and career development. They all profit from your belief that you're not enough as you are. The diet industry alone is worth $70 billion annually. Think about that business model for a moment. They're selling you the solution to a problem they helped create. They profit not from your success, but from your repeated failure. Because if you actually achieved lasting satisfaction with your body, you'd stop buying their products. The programming is everywhere. It's in the way we structure our education system, ranking children against each other from the earliest ages. It's in our economic system, which requires constant growth and consumption to function. It's in our social media platforms, which are literally designed to trigger comparison and keep you scrolling. But here's what they don't want you to know. None of this is inevitable. None of this is natural. It's all learned. And anything that's learned can be unlearned. So what happens when you stop running the program? Let me paint you two pictures. Picture A. You wake up tomorrow and immediately check your phone. You see someone's vacation photos, someone's promotion announcement, someone's perfect relationship post. The familiar pang hits your chest. You spend the next hour scrolling, each post a small knife cut to your self-esteem. You get dressed looking at yourself critically in the mirror, comparing today's reflection to yesterday's, to the filtered images you've been consuming, to some impossible standard that exists nowhere in reality. You go to work carrying this weight. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to gauge where you stand. Did you say the right thing? Are you as smart as your colleagues think you are? Are you falling behind? The day becomes a series of small competitions you didn't even sign up for, each one draining a little more of your energy, your joy, your sense of self. You come home exhausted, not from your work, but from the constant effort of trying to measure up. You scroll some more before bed, promising yourself you'll do better tomorrow, be better tomorrow, achieve more tomorrow. You fall asleep with that familiar knot in your stomach, planning how to close the gap between who you are and who you think you should be. This is picture A. This is life with the program running. And for most people, this isn't just one day. This is every day for decades. Now, picture B. You wake up tomorrow and you don't immediately reach for your phone. Instead, you lie there for a moment and notice how it feels to simply be alive. You're not measuring this moment against anything. You're not trying to optimize it or improve it or document it for others to see. You're just experiencing it. You look in the mirror and see a body that's carried you through life, that's healed from injuries, that allows you to experience the world. You're not comparing it to anyone else's body, because why would you? This is the only body you have, the only body you'll ever have, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, keeping you alive and aware and capable of love. You go to work and you engage with your tasks for their own sake, not to prove anything to anyone. You collaborate with colleagues instead of competing with them. You measure your progress against your own past performance, not against other people's highlight reels. When someone shares good news, you feel genuinely happy for them because their success doesn't threaten yours. Their joy doesn't diminish your joy. Their achievements don't make your achievements less valuable. You come home energized not because everything went perfectly, but because you spent the day being yourself instead of trying to be someone else. You feel satisfied not because you achieved more than others, but because you showed up authentically to your own life. This is picture B. This is life after you've debugged the program. And the extraordinary thing is, nothing in your external circumstances has to change for you to move from picture A to picture B. The only thing that changes is your relationship to your experience. But let me be clear, this isn't about lowering your standards or becoming complacent. It's about raising your standards for what actually matters. Instead of trying to be better than others, you focus on being better than you were yesterday. Instead of seeking validation from the world, you learn to validate yourself. Instead of measuring your worth by external metrics, you discover that your worth is inherent, unchanging, and completely independent of anyone else's opinion. Here's what researchers have found happens when people break free from comparative thinking. Their stress hormones decrease, their sleep improves, their relationships deepen because they're no longer seeing other people as threats to their self-worth. Their creativity increases because they're no longer afraid of making mistakes or looking foolish. Their productivity actually goes up because they're motivated by intrinsic satisfaction rather than external pressure. Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky's research at UC Riverside has shown that people who focus on their own growth rather than comparative achievement report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction, better physical health, and stronger social connections. But perhaps most importantly, they discover something that comparison-based thinking makes impossible: contentment. Not the fleeting happiness that comes from temporary success, but the deep, abiding sense of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, as exactly who you're supposed to be. This isn't a fantasy. This isn't wishful thinking. This is a documented, measurable, achievable state of being. And the only thing standing between you and this state is a program that was installed without your consent and is running without your awareness. But here's the beautiful truth. Once you see the program, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you can begin to choose whether or not to run it. Let's dig deeper into how this programming actually works, because understanding the mechanism is the first step to dismantling it. In the 1960s, a Canadian psychologist named Albert Bandura conducted what's now known as the Bobo doll experiment. He showed children a video of an adult aggressively attacking an inflatable doll. Later, when the children were left alone with the same doll, they mimicked the exact aggressive behaviors they had witnessed, even though no one had taught them to do so explicitly. This experiment revealed something profound about human learning. We don't just learn through direct instruction, we learn through observation, imitation, and unconscious absorption. And this learning happens whether we're aware of it or not. Now apply this to your entire childhood. Every movie you watched, every conversation you overheard, every interaction you witnessed between your parents, your teachers, your peers, all of it was programming your unconscious mind with beliefs about how the world works, what matters and what doesn't. When you saw your parents stress about money, you learned that financial security equals safety. When you watched movies where the popular kids were happy and the outcasts were miserable, you learned that social acceptance equals worth. When you witnessed adults comparing houses, cars, careers, you learned that life is a competition and your value is determined by how well you perform relative to others. But here's where it gets really insidious. This programming doesn't just influence your thoughts, it literally changes your brain structure. Neuroscientist Dr. Rick Hansen explains it this way. The brain is like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. This is called the negativity bias, and it evolved to keep our ancestors alive. But in modern society, it means that every small inadequacy, every minor failure, every moment of not measuring up gets stuck in your neural networks, while your successes and strengths slide right off. Over time, these repeated patterns create what neuroscientists call neural pathways, literally physical structures in your brain that make certain thoughts more likely to occur. It's a bit like wearing a path through a field by walking the same route every single day. Eventually, the path becomes so well worn that you just automatically follow it without even thinking. This is actually why changing these patterns feels so difficult. You're not just changing your mind, you're literally rewiring your brain. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato understood this thousands of years ago, even though he didn't have the neuroscience to explain it. In his famous allegory of the cave, he described prisoners chained in a cave, watching shadows on the wall and believing those shadows were reality itself. The shadows weren't real, they were just projections. But the prisoners had been watching them for so long that they couldn't imagine anything else existed. Your conditioning is like those shadows. The beliefs you have about yourself, about what you need to be happy, about what success looks like, they're not reality, they're projections, but you've been watching them for so long that they feel completely real. Plato said that education isn't about putting knowledge into someone's mind, it's about turning them around so they can see that what they thought was reality was just shadows on a wall. The Eastern wisdom traditions understood this too. The Hindu concept of Maya, often translated as illusion, doesn't mean that the world doesn't exist. It means that our perception of the world is filtered through layers of conditioning that distort our ability to see clearly. The Buddha described it as being like a person who's been wearing colored glasses for so long that they've forgotten they're wearing them. Everything they see is tinted, but they believe that's just how the world looks. And in Zen Buddhism, there's a beautiful phrase, original face, before your parents were born. It points to the self that exists before all the programming, before all the conditioning, before all the learned beliefs about who you should be and what you should want. Modern psychology has validated these ancient insights. Dr. Ellen Langer's research on mindfulness at Harvard has shown that most of our daily behaviors are automatic. We're, literally sleepwalking through our lives, following scripts we learned long ago without ever questioning whether those scripts still serve us. And Dr. Daniel Kahneman's work on cognitive biases has revealed just how many of our so-called rational decisions are actually influenced by unconscious programming. We think we're making choices, but we're often just following predictable patterns that were established years or even decades ago. But here's the hopeful part. This same research has also shown that human beings have an extraordinary capacity for what psychologists call neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural pathways at any age. You're not stuck with the programming you received as a child. You can literally reprogram yourself. Dr. Joe Dispenza's work has demonstrated that through conscious practice, people can break free from automatic thought patterns and create new ones. His research subjects have shown measurable changes in brain structure after just 8 weeks of mindfulness practice. And here's what's truly remarkable. When people begin to recognize and release their conditioning, they don't become less capable or less motivated. They become more capable and more motivated. But their motivation comes from a different source, not fear of inadequacy, but genuine enthusiasm for growth. Not the need to prove themselves, but the joy of expressing themselves. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who had access to every luxury the Roman Empire could provide, wrote in his personal journal, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does." He understood that comparison is optional, competition is optional. The constant monitoring of your relative position in the world is optional. And when you make these things optional, when you stop running programs that were designed to keep you dissatisfied, something extraordinary happens. You discover who you actually are underneath all the programming. You discover your original face. You discover that the person you've been trying to become through achievement and acquisition and approval, that person was you all along. So how do you actually break free from this programming? How do you debug a system that's been running for decades? The first step is recognition. You can't change what you can't see. So let's start by making the invisible visible. Step 1, the programming audit. For the next week, I want you to become a detective of your own mind. Every time you feel anxious, inadequate, or dissatisfied, stop and ask yourself, where did this thought come from? Not why you're having it, but where it originated. When you look in the mirror and automatically notice your flaws, ask, who taught me to see myself this way? When you feel behind in life, ask, according to whose timeline? When you want something you don't have, ask, is this my desire or someone else's? Most of the time, you'll trace these thoughts back to messages you received years ago. The critical voice in your head often sounds remarkably similar to someone from your past, a parent, a teacher, a peer who made you feel small. The standards you're trying to meet often mirror the values of a society that profits from your dissatisfaction. This isn't about blame, this isn't about making anyone wrong, it's about seeing clearly. Because once you see that most of your limiting beliefs aren't actually yours, they begin to lose their power over you. Step 2, the comparison detox. Here's a radical experiment. For 30 days, stop consuming any content that triggers comparison. Unfollow social media accounts that make you feel inadequate. Stop reading magazines that profit from your insecurities. Avoid conversations that revolve around who's doing what, who's achieving what, who's buying what. This isn't permanent. This is just long enough for your nervous system to reset, for your brain to remember what it feels like to exist without constant comparison. And here's what you'll discover. Without the constant input of other people's highlight reels, your own life starts to look pretty amazing. Without the artificial pressure to keep up, you start to notice what you actually enjoy. Without the noise of other people's definitions of success, you start to hear your own voice again. Step 3. The gratitude revolution. But we need to replace the old program with something new, something better. And the most powerful antidote to comparison is gratitude, not the superficial kind, but deep, genuine appreciation for what is. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you start running the comparison program, take 5 minutes to notice what's working in your life. And I mean really notice that the fact that you woke up, the fact that you have access to clean water, the fact that someone somewhere loves you, the fact that you have the capacity to learn, to grow, to change. This isn't about positive thinking or denial. This is about training your brain to notice reality, the full reality, not just the parts that the programming has taught you to focus on. Step 4. The authenticity practice. Start making decisions based on what feels right to you, not what looks right to others. Start pursuing goals that excite you, not goals that impress others. Start expressing opinions that reflect your values, not opinions that gain approval. This is terrifying at first because the programming has taught you that acceptance depends on conformity. But here's what happens when you start being authentic. You attract people who like you for who you actually are, not for who you're pretending to be. And you discover that the approval you get for being yourself is infinitely more satisfying than the approval you get for being someone else. Step 5. The reframe. Start seeing other people's success as proof of what's possible, not proof of what you lack. When someone achieves something you want, instead of thinking, why them and not me, think, if they can do it, maybe I can too. This single shift in perspective transforms the entire world around you. Instead of living in a universe of scarcity where someone else's win means your loss, you start living in a universe of abundance where someone else's win expands your sense of what's possible. Step 6. The identity shift. This is the big one. Instead of defining yourself by your achievements, your possessions, your status relative to others, start defining yourself by your capacity to grow, to love, to contribute, to experience wonder. Instead of saying, I am successful or I am unsuccessful, try, I am someone who is always learning. Instead of, I am attractive or I'm unattractive, try, I am someone who appreciates beauty in all its forms. And instead of, I'm ahead or I'm behind, try, I'm exactly where I need to be for my next step forward. This isn't just semantics. This is, a fundamental shift from a fixed identity based on comparison to a growth identity based on potential. And when you make this shift, criticism stops feeling like attack and starts feeling like information. Failure stops feeling like evidence of inadequacy and starts feeling like feedback for improvement. Step 7. The community shift. Finally, start surrounding yourself with people who support your authentic self rather than your programmed self. Seek out relationships where you can be vulnerable, where you can admit uncertainty, where you don't have to perform or compete or prove anything. This might mean honestly having difficult conversations with people who are invested in keeping you small. It might mean setting boundaries with family members who still treat you like the person you were in childhood. It might mean finding new communities that value growth over achievement, connection over competition, authenticity over image. But here's what you'll discover. When you stop participating in the comparison game, you give other people permission to stop playing too. Your freedom becomes their freedom. Your authenticity inspires their authenticity. But let's go even deeper. Because there's something about this programming that goes beyond individual psychology, beyond personal development, beyond even neuroscience. The programming isn't just personal, it's cultural. It's not just individual, it's systemic. And recognizing this changes everything about how you understand your role in the world. You see, the same forces that programmed you to feel inadequate have programmed entire societies to believe that happiness comes from having more, being more, achieving more. This isn't accidental. This is how economies grow. This is how political systems maintain control. This is how entire civilizations organize themselves around the pursuit of more. But what if the whole system is based on a lie? What if the idea that we need to constantly improve, constantly compete, constantly acquire new things to be happy is not just wrong on an individual level, but wrong on a species level? Indigenous cultures around the world had a completely different relationship to success and happiness. Many Native American tribes had no concept of individual ownership because they understood that everything belongs to everyone. They had no concept of competition because they understood that everyone's well-being was interconnected. The African philosophy of Ubuntu says, "I am because we are," the recognition that individual happiness is impossible without collective well-being. The Bhutanese government measures gross national happiness instead of gross domestic product, recognizing that a country's progress should be measured by the contentment of its people, not the size of its economy. These aren't primitive ideas. These are sophisticated understandings of human nature that we've, frankly, programmed ourselves to forget. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to be better than others, you actually become better. Not better in comparison, but better in the truest sense, more creative, more compassionate, more courageous, more alive. When you stop chasing external validation, you start generating internal validation. When you stop measuring your worth by your achievements, you start achieving things that are actually worth doing. When you stop competing with others, you start collaborating with life itself. This is what the mystics throughout history have pointed to when they talk about enlightenment, what the psychologists call self-actualization, what the philosophers call authenticity. It's not some mystical state that only special people can achieve. It's simply what happens when you stop running programs that were never yours to begin with. But here's where it gets really interesting. When you start living from this place of authentic contentment, it's contagious. People can feel it. They can sense that you're not competing with them, not judging them, not trying to impress them. And this creates a kind of safety that allows them to drop their own masks, their own programming, their own defensive strategies. You become a permission slip for other people to be real. Your freedom becomes their freedom. Your peace becomes their peace. And this is how real change happens in the world, not through more programs, more systems, more external structures, but through individuals who have debugged their own conditioning and are living as examples of what's possible. Think about the people in your life who feel most authentic, most genuinely content. How do you feel when you're around them? You feel like you can relax, like you don't have to perform, like you can just be yourself. That's the effect you have on others when you stop running the comparison program. Your children, if you have them, stop learning that their worth depends on their performance. Your friends stop feeling like they need to compete with you for attention or approval. Your colleagues stop seeing you as a threat and start seeing you as an ally. This isn't just personal transformation, it's social transformation. Every person who breaks free from their conditioning makes it easier for others to break free from theirs. But let's talk about the programming you probably haven't even noticed yet. Because the comparison program is just the surface layer. Underneath it are even deeper beliefs that shape your entire relationship to existence. There's the scarcity program, the belief that there's not enough love, not enough success, not enough happiness to go around. This program makes you hoard opportunities, guard your achievements, and see other people as competitors for limited resources. There's the control program, the belief that you're responsible for managing and manipulating every aspect of your experience to avoid pain and ensure pleasure. This program makes you anxious about the future, regretful about the past, and unable to be present in the moment. There's the separation program, the belief that you're fundamentally alone, that you have to earn love, that you have to prove your worth, that you have to defend yourself against a world that doesn't care about you. This program makes connection feel dangerous and vulnerability feel like weakness. And underneath all of these is perhaps the deepest program of all, the inadequacy program, the belief that you, as you are right now, are not enough, that you need to become someone else, achieve something more, fix something broken about yourself before you can be happy, before you can be loved, before you can be at peace. This is the master program, this is the root code that all the other programs branch out from. And it's completely, utterly, fundamentally false. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at the evidence. Look at Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research at UCLA has shown that human beings are literally wired for connection. Our brains have dedicated neural networks for understanding and relating to other people. We're not separate beings trying to connect. We're connected beings who have been programmed to feel separate. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion has demonstrated that people who treat themselves with kindness, who extend to themselves the same understanding they would give to a good friend, show greater resilience, better emotional regulation, and higher levels of life satisfaction than people who try to motivate themselves through self-criticism. And Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's work on positive emotions has revealed that joy, love, gratitude, and contentment aren't rewards you earn through achievement. They're your natural state when you're not running programs that block them. In other words, happiness isn't something you have to create or achieve or, even deserve. It's something you uncover by, removing the obstacles you've learned to put in front of it. Peace isn't something you have to earn. It's what remains when you stop creating conflict in your mind. Love isn't something you have to prove you're worthy of. It's what flows naturally when you stop defending against it. You're not broken and in need of fixing. You're whole and in need of remembering. The Taoist sage Lao Tzu wrote, "At birth man is supple and weak, at death stiff and hard. All things under heaven are supple and weak when alive, stiff and hard when dead. Therefore, the stiff and hard are companions of death. The supple and weak are companions of life." He wasn't talking about physical flexibility, he was talking about mental flexibility, the ability to flow with life instead of rigidly trying to control it, the ability to adapt instead of forcing, and the ability to be yourself instead of trying to be who you think you should be. The conditioning makes you stiff and hard. It creates rigid beliefs about how things should be, how you should be, how others should be. But underneath the conditioning is your original flexibility, your natural ability to respond to life spontaneously, creatively, authentically. The Indian sage Ramana Maharshi put it even more simply. Your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render the world. When you stop running other people's programs and start living from your authentic self, you don't just transform your own life, you transform the lives of everyone around you. But here's what no one tells you about breaking free from this programming. It's not always comfortable. There's a moment, and if you're serious about this work, you will reach this moment where you suddenly see how much of your life has been spent chasing things that don't actually matter to you, how much energy you've wasted trying to impress people whose opinions don't actually affect your well-being, how many years you've spent solving problems that only exist because you accepted someone else's definition of what problems are. This moment can be devastating. It can feel like waking up from a dream only to realize that what you thought was your life was just someone else's movie that you've been acting in. Some people, when they reach this point, get angry at their parents for the messages they received, angry at society for the systems that exploited them, angry at themselves for not seeing it sooner. But anger, while understandable, keeps you trapped in the same reactive patterns. The real liberation comes when you move beyond anger to something much more powerful. Compassion. Compassion for your parents who were running their own inherited programs and doing the best they could with the awareness they had. Compassion for the society that created these systems because they too are trapped in inherited patterns of thinking. And most importantly, compassion for yourself, for the person who was just trying to survive. to belong, to be loved in the only ways you knew how. When you start debugging your programming, you might go through what psychologists call an identity crisis. If you're not your achievements, if you're not your possessions, if you're not your status relative to others, then who are you? This question can be terrifying, but it's also the doorway to freedom. Because underneath all the programming, underneath all those learned beliefs about who you should be, there's a self that doesn't need to be created or improved or validated. There's a consciousness that's already whole, already worthy, already enough. Some people call this the soul. Some call it consciousness. Some call it the true self. The name honestly doesn't matter. What matters is recognizing that this self exists, that it's been there all along, just waiting patiently underneath all the noise. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to be someone else, you actually become more yourself than you've ever been. When you stop trying to impress others, you become more impressive. And when you stop seeking validation, you become more valuable. Not to the marketplace of human opinion, but to the actual experience of being alive. This might sound mystical, but it's actually, intensely practical. When you're not constantly worried about how you measure up, you have more mental energy available for creativity, for problem solving, for genuine connection. When you're not defending an image, you can take risks, make mistakes, and learn faster. Studies have shown that people who have gone through this kind of identity shift, what psychologists call post-conventional development, are more innovative, more resilient, more effective leaders, and honestly, happier in their relationships. But more than that, they report a sense of inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. They've found what the advertising industry spends billions trying to convince you doesn't exist, satisfaction that comes from within. So, what does life look like when you're running your own program instead of someone else's? Imagine waking up tomorrow, and the first thought that crosses your mind isn't what do I need to do today to feel worthy, but what wants to emerge through me today. Imagine looking at other people's success and feeling genuinely happy for them because you understand that their success doesn't diminish your own. Imagine seeing their joy and just feeling grateful that joy exists in the world, regardless of who's experiencing it. Imagine making decisions based on what aligns with your values rather than what impresses others. Imagine pursuing goals because they excite you, not because they prove something about you. Imagine relationships where you don't have to perform, where you can be completely honest about your struggles and your fears because you know that your worth doesn't depend on appearing perfect. This isn't fantasy. This is what becomes available when you stop running programs that were designed to keep you dissatisfied. And here's something that might surprise you. When you stop trying to be more productive and start trying to be more authentic, you actually become more productive than you've ever been, but your productivity comes from joy rather than pressure, from alignment rather than force, from inspiration rather than desperation. You start working on things that matter to you rather than things that just look impressive to others. You start creating value rather than just capturing value. You start contributing rather than just competing. The relationship revolution. Your relationships transform completely. When you're not constantly comparing yourself to others, you stop needing others to be less than you for you to feel good about yourself. This means you can genuinely celebrate their wins, support their growth, and love them unconditionally. And when people feel that you're not competing with them, not judging them, not trying to use them to validate yourself, they relax around you. They trust you. They open up to you. Your relationships become deeper, more authentic, more nourishing. The creative explosion. Perhaps most importantly, your creativity explodes when you're not afraid of making mistakes, not worried about looking foolish, not concerned with impressing anyone. You become willing to experiment, to play, to try things that might not work. This is where true innovation comes from. Not from trying to copy what's already successful, but from expressing what's uniquely yours. Not from following someone else's formula, but from trusting your own instincts. But let me share with you the ultimate truth that this entire journey leads to. You are not here to live up to someone else's expectations. You are not here to fit into someone else's definition of success. You are not here to prove that you're worthy of love, respect, or happiness. You are here to be yourself, completely, unapologetically, authentically yourself. And the self you're here to be isn't the self you think you should be. It's the self you are when you stop trying to be anyone else. It's the self that emerges when you release all the programming, all the conditioning, all the learned beliefs about who you're supposed to be. This self is not perfect. This self makes mistakes, has flaws, struggles with challenges, but this self is real, and real is infinitely more valuable than perfect. The final program: delete. Here's the most radical thing you can do. Stop trying to improve yourself and start trying to know yourself. Stop trying to become someone else and start trying to unbecome everything you're not. Every belief you have about yourself, examine it. Every standard you're trying to meet, question it. Every goal you're pursuing, ask yourself if it's really yours or if it was planted there by the programming. And when you find beliefs, standards, and goals that aren't authentically yours, don't fight them. Don't struggle with them. Just let them go. Like deleting an app you no longer need. The space that remains when you delete all the unnecessary programs, that space is you. That space is vast, peaceful, creative, loving, and completely adequate exactly as it is. This space doesn't need improvement. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It just needs to be recognized, honored, and expressed. The ripple effect continues. And when you start living from this space, something miraculous happens. You become a source of peace in a world that's forgotten what peace feels like. You become a reminder to others that there's another way to live. You become living proof that the programming is optional. Your very existence becomes a form of service. Not because you're trying to save anyone or change anyone, but because you're demonstrating what's possible when someone chooses authenticity over approval, presence over performance, being over becoming. So here we are. You now know something that most people will never discover. You've been running someone else's software your entire life. Programs written by people who didn't know you, who didn't care about your unique gifts, who couldn't possibly understand what would actually make you happy. But you also now know something even more important. These programs are not permanent. They're not hardwired. They're not part of your essential nature. They're just learned patterns that can be unlearned, inherited beliefs that can be questioned, automatic responses that can be consciously changed. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? You can go back to unconsciously running the programs, pretending you never saw behind the curtain. You can continue measuring yourself against impossible standards, chasing goals that aren't yours, seeking validation from people whose opinions don't actually matter to your well-being. Or you can begin the most important work of your life, the work of becoming yourself, not the self you think you should be, not the self that would impress others or meet society's expectations, but the self that you actually are underneath all the programming, the self that exists before comparison, before conditioning, before anyone told you who you were supposed to be. This self is not smaller than your programmed self. It's larger. It's not less capable. It's more capable. It's not less ambitious. It's more ambitious, but ambitious for things that actually matter. Things like peace, authenticity, connection, creativity, service, love. This self doesn't need to prove anything because it has nothing to prove. It doesn't need to achieve anything because it is already complete. It doesn't need to become anything because it already is everything it needs to be. Every moment offers you the same choice. Will you run the programs that were installed without your permission, or will you live from the awareness that exists before all programming? Will you believe the thoughts that tell you you're not enough, or will you recognize that these thoughts are just echoes of old conditioning? Will you chase happiness in all the places where you've been told it can be found? Or will you discover that happiness is what remains when you stop looking for it elsewhere? The truth is, you've never been broken. You've never been inadequate. You've never been behind or less than or not enough. You've just been running programs that told you these things were true. But, programs can be changed, code can be rewritten, and the programmer that is you. The real you, the you that existed before anyone told you who you should be, The you that will exist long after all the programs have been deleted and all the conditioning has been cleared away. That you, the original you, the authentic you, the unprogrammable you, that's who's been waiting patiently underneath all the noise, just ready to finally be free. The programming stops here. Your life begins now.